Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first topic of our course. You can see here that our topic is new criticism. So I want you to think about the name itself. New compared to what? And criticism in what sense? Here, criticism does not mean finding faults. It means the careful study and interpretation of literature. So when we say new criticism, we are talking about a method of reading and analyzing literary texts that once presented itself as a new, more careful, more disciplined way of studying literature. This approach became influential mainly in the first half of the 20th century, especially in the United States and Britain. Many of the ideas we now take for granted in literature classes, like close reading, for example, were shaped by this movement. Now, before we define it in detail, it helps to imagine the situation before new criticism became popular. In earlier literary study, people often focused heavily on the author's life or historical background or moral lessons. A poem might be treated as a window into the author's feelings. A novel might be read mainly as a social or historical document. New critics were not satisfied with that. They felt literature was being treated as something secondary, as evidence for history or biography, rather than as art in its own right. So they made a strong claim. A literary text, they argued, should be studied as a self contained work of art, not as a clue to the author's psychology, not as a reflection of political events, but as something with its own internal structure and meaning. That shift may sound small, but it changed how literature was taught and studied for decades. Looking at this slide, you also see a background image of puzzle pieces. I chose it intentionally. Actually, it works as a helpful metaphor. New critics often treated a poem like a puzzle. Each word, each image, each metaphor is a piece. Meaning comes from how those pieces fit together. In other words, the text is not random. It is carefully constructed by the artist, the poet, writer. The critic's job is to examine how its parts relate to each other. So instead of asking, what did the author intend? A new critic might ask, how do the words on the page create meaning? Instead of asking, what was happening in history at the time, they might ask, how do irony, contrast, or imagery work inside this text? This does not mean history or biography are useless. It means new criticism deliberately sets them aside during analysis. The focus stays on the text itself. For now, it is enough to remember three basic points. First, new criticism focuses on the text itself. Second, it values close, careful reading. Third, it tries to treat literature as an independent art form. So keep this foundation in mind. The rest of the lecture will build on these basic principles. All right. We introduced new criticism as a way of reading that focuses closely on the text itself. Now, we can ask a different question. Why does it matter? Why should students today still learn about a movement that began nearly a century ago? Because new criticism still shapes how literature is taught, even when teachers do not explicitly mention it. Take, for example, a literature classroom. When students are asked to support their argument, support them with quotations from the text, that expectation comes largely from new critical practice. The idea is that claims about a poem or story should be grounded in the words on the page, not in guesses about the author's life, not in personal feelings alone. This habit is so common now that it feels natural, but it was not always the standard approach. Another lasting influence, a thing that we still use is what we call close reading. Close reading means paying careful attention to details of language, word choice, repetition, metaphor, tone, patterns, even small shifts in phrasing. In close reading, no detail is unimportant. They are all considered. A single word can shape meaning. A repeated image can connect different parts of a poem. A contrast between two phrases can reveal tension inside the text. So, I mean, the key idea is that meaning is built with language. So the critic studies how language works, not just what it seems to say on the surface. This approach forces students to read carefully and slowly. It asks them to notice how a text creates effects, not just what story it tells. Now, look at the point on this slide that says focus on the text itself as evidence. That word, evidence, is important. New critics treated literary interpretation almost like an argument. If you make a claim about a poem, you must show where the text supports that claim. So instead of saying, I think this poem is sad, a new critical approach would ask, what words, images, or sounds in the poem create sadness? Where is the proof in the text? This method pushes readers to justify their interpretations. So it gives literary study a more structured and academic style. This also made literature easier to teach in universities. Teachers could ask students to analyze the same text and discuss the same lines. The focus stayed on a common object, the text itself. Of course, later theories disagreed with new criticism. Some would argue that ignoring history, the period, the life of the writer, or culture limits our understanding. Others would say readers bring their own meanings to texts. Those debates are important, and we will talk about them later. But even critics of new criticism often keep one of its main tools, which is close reading. So its influence did not disappear, it blended into later approaches. This helps us understand why new criticism remains relevant. I mean, it's not because it has all the answers, it doesn't answer everything, but because it trained generations of readers to take language seriously. The main idea here is that new criticism helped establish careful textual analysis as as an important skill in literary studies. So far, we talked about why new criticism matters and how it shaped classroom practice. Now we take a step back in time. To understand new criticism clearly, we need to see what it was reacting against. We need to see what was before new criticism. This refers to an older approach, often called biographical historical criticism. Let's take that slowly. Biographical criticism studies a literary work by looking at the author's life. The basic idea is simple. If you want to understand the text, you should understand the writer, their experiences, their beliefs, their personal struggles. So, for instance, if a poet went through a painful loss, critics might read sadness in the poem as a direct reflection of that event. The poem becomes almost a personal record. Historical criticism works a bit differently. It focuses on the time period. It connects the literature to political events, social conditions, or major ideas of the era. A novel might be read mainly as a window into its historical moment. Both methods can be valuable. They help us place literature in context. They remind us that texts come from real people living in real societies. But here is where some problems appeared. When these approaches dominated, the text itself sometimes received less attention. critics could spend more time discussing the author's biography or the historical background than the actual language of the poem or story. In some cases, a literary work was treated almost like a historical document or a psychological clue. Its artistic design, the way it was built, mattered less. The key point here is that meaning was often searched for outside the text, in the author's life, in history, in society. Now, if you glance at the visuals on this slide, you see writers surrounded by papers and manuscripts. We do not need to analyze these images deeply. Still, they quietly suggest a focus on the author as a figure, the person behind the writing. That reflects how criticism often worked at the time. New critics did not claim that biography or history are useless. Their concern was different. They felt literature was being reduced to something else, history, psychology, or moral teaching, rather than studied as art. So they asked a different question. What if we treat the literary work as an independent object? What if meaning is not something we bring from outside, but something built within the text itself? That question led to a major shift in literary study. It is important to remember that new criticism did not appear out of nowhere. In a sense, it was a reaction, a response to methods that leaned too heavily on external context. Seeing this background helps us understand why new critics insisted so strongly on focusing on the words on the page. As we move forward, we will look at how this new approach developed and who shaped it. That will show how a reaction against older methods slowly became a full critical movement. In the previous slide, we looked at the critical approaches that came before new criticism. We saw how biography and history often guided interpretation. Now we turn to the moment when new criticism begins to take shape. This slide focuses on the early 20th century, roughly from the 1900s to the 1940s. This is when new criticism gradually forms as a recognizable movement. One thing to keep in mind is that new criticism did not appear overnight. It developed slowly. It grew out of dissatisfaction with context-heavy criticism, approaches that depended strongly on history, society, and the author's life. Some scholars felt literary study was moving too far away from the text itself. They wanted a method that brought attention back to the words on the page, to structure, and to internal design. At the same time, literature itself was changing. Modernist poetry was emerging. Poets such as T.S. Eliot were writing poems that were dense and carefully shaped. These works often required slow, attentive reading. Biography alone could not explain them. Readers had to notice imagery, symbolism, and patterns. In other words, the literature itself encouraged closer reading. So, in a sense, creative writing and criticism were shaping each other. Now, look at the phrase practical criticism. This term is closely linked to the British critic I. A. Richards. His method asked students to analyze poems without knowing the author's name or historical background. The goal was simple. Could readers interpret a poem by focusing only on the text? This exercise trained students to pay close attention to language and form. Over time, these practices helped lead to what we now call new criticism. It is also important that this movement developed in both the United Kingdom and the United States. In the US, especially, new criticism became influential in universities. It offered a clear, teachable method for studying literature. If you notice the classroom image in the background, it fits the story quite well. New criticism was not just a theory on paper, it became a classroom practice. It shaped how many generations learned to read literature. The key idea here is that new criticism grew out of debate and teaching practice. It responded to earlier methods and it suited the needs of modern literature and modern education. As we continue, we will look at the major figures behind this movement. Seeing who they were and what they argued will make the ideas of new criticism even clearer. Now we turn to some of the key figures who shaped new criticism and related formalist ideas. Rather than just listing names, I'd like to pause on what each person actually contributed to the way we read literature. Let's begin again with I.A. Richards, because in many ways he sets the method in motion. Richards is closely associated with what we call practical criticism. His classroom experiments were simple but quite powerful. He gave students poems with no author's name, no date, no background, just the text on the page. Why would he do this? Well, he wanted to observe how interpretation works when readers rely only on language and form. He noticed that many students made unsupported guesses or leaned heavily on personal impressions. So he argued that good interpretation must stay close to textual evidence. Claims should be grounded in details from the text. That idea, linking interpretation to evidence, becomes a lasting foundation for literary study. Next, consider William Empson. Empson is best known for his work on ambiguity. And here, ambiguity does not mean confusion. It means a word or phrase can carry several meanings at once. Empson shows that this is not a weakness in poetry, quite the opposite. It is often a source of richness. A single line can suggest different ideas at the same time, and those ideas can interact. This encourages readers to slow down, to notice how meaning is layered. In that sense, Empson deepens close reading by showing how complex language can be, highly productive rather than problematic. Now, let's move to the American branch. John Crow ransom matters because he helps name and consolidate the movement. His book, The New Criticism, gives a clear label to ideas that were already taking shape. He argues that a literary work should be treated as an object worthy of careful internal analysis. Then we come to Clint Brooks and Robert Penn Warren. Their influence is especially strong in the classroom. Their textbook, Understanding Poetry, trains students to read closely and to see poems as structured wholes. Brooks, in particular, emphasizes irony, paradox, and tension. He argues that a poem's meaning emerges from how its parts work together, not from a simple summary. This leads to a well-known new critical idea, sometimes called the heresy of paraphrase. The warning is straightforward. If you reduce a poem to a plain summary, you lose what makes it literary, its structure, tone, its verbal patterns. In other words, how a poem means is part of what it means. Finally, we should mention W.K. Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley. They are known for identifying two influential interpretive fallacies or mistakes. The first is the intentional fallacy. This is the error of saying a text means what the author intended it to mean. Wimsatt and Beardsley argue that even if we knew the author's intention, that would not settle interpretation. What matters is what the text actually does on the page. The second is the affective fallacy. This is the error of saying a text means whatever a reader feels. Personal responses vary widely, sometimes wildly, so they cannot serve as the main basis for interpretation. Together, these fallacies steer critics toward a shared standard, the text itself as evidence. Meaning should be demonstrated through patterns, images, and structures that others can also observe. If we step back for a moment, a pattern starts to appear. So all of these figures, in different ways, are trying to make literary study more disciplined, less guesswork, less personal opinion, more careful attention to language. The key point is not that context or readers never matter. It's that new critics wanted a stable ground for interpretation. Textual evidence became that ground, and this helps explain their lasting influence. Even today, when students are asked to quote the text to support a claim, they are practicing a new critical habit, whether they realize it or not. In the previous slide, we looked at key figures who shaped new criticism. We saw how they trained readers to pay close attention to language and structure. Now we come to the heart of the movement. This slide captures it in a short phrase, the text itself. When new critics say the text itself, they are making a strong claim about where meaning comes from. I mean, they say that meaning is found in the words on the page, not in the author's private intentions, not in the reader's personal feelings, and not in the text's historical background. That doesn't mean that history or biography never matter. It just means they come second. For interpretation, the first and main evidence must come from the text. A key idea here is that a literary work is treated as an autonomous verbal object. That can sound abstract, complicated, so let me put it simply. Verbal means made of words, and autonomous means it stands on its own. So a poem or story is seen as a carefully built structure of words that works by itself. I mean, it does not rely on outside information to produce meaning. Its language, patterns, images, and sounds already carry meaning within them. This view partly emerged as a reaction to earlier methods. Those methods often treated literature as a reflection of the author's life or the spirit of the age. New critics felt that approach sometimes overlooked the craft of writing itself. They wanted readers to look closely at how a text is made. Well, now think about what follows from this. If meaning is in the text, then interpretation has to be based on textual evidence. I mean, what I mean is you can't just say, I feel this poem is about loneliness. You need to point to images, metaphors, or patterns that suggest loneliness. So, in other words, your claim must be supported by details others can also see. This turns interpretation into a disciplined, serious activity. It becomes less about opinion and more about demonstration. You show how the words work together to create meaning. So, for new critics, how a text means cannot be separated from what it means. Form and meaning are closely bound together. The guiding habit here is careful attention, slow reading, looking again, asking how details connect. So we talked about the central idea of new criticism, the text itself. Now we move to the main method that follows from that idea. I mean, how are we going to practice, do new criticism? This method is called close reading. Close reading means reading a text very carefully, slowly, with attention to detail. It is not about reading quickly for the story. It is about examining how the text works. In close reading, we look closely at words. We notice which words are chosen and which are avoided. We pay attention to repetition. If a word or image appears again and again, that usually matters. We also look at patterns. I mean, for example, patterns of contrast, light and dark, movement and stillness, hope and fear. These patterns often shape meaning. Structure is also important. I mean, for example, we ask simple questions. How does the text begin? How does it end? Where does it slow down? Where does it change direction? Another major focus is imagery. Imagery means the pictures created by language. When a poem uses images of roads, weather, darkness, or light, those images guide our understanding. They are not decoration. I mean, they're put there for a reason by the writer, the artist, the poet. Metaphor is also closely related. A metaphor connects one thing to another. In close reading, we do not skip metaphors. We ask what is being compared and why that comparison matters. Tone is also important. Tone means the attitude or mood of the speaker. I mean, is the voice calm, uncertain, confident, ironical? Tone often shapes how we understand the meaning of a line. Form matters as well. In poetry, this can include rhythm, sound, or line breaks. In prose, it can include sentence length or point of view. These choices affect how the text feels and how it communicates meaning. If you make a claim, you must point to the text. What I mean is, you quote words, you describe patterns, you explain how details support your idea. This makes your interpretation something others can discuss and evaluate. It creates shared ground in the classroom. Everyone has access to the same text. The image on the right side of the slide shows notes written on a poem. You see words marked, questions written in the margins, and connections drawn between lines. This is a good visual example of close reading in practice. It shows attention, not summary. Close reading also trains patience. You may read the same line several times. Each time you notice something new, meaning is not always obvious at first glance. The key idea here is discipline. Close reading teaches readers to slow down and listen to the text. It asks, what is happening here in the language? Even today, many other theories still begin with close reading. I mean, they may add history, politics, or ideology later, but the habit of careful attention often remains. So, close reading is not just a technique from the past, it is one of the most lasting tools new criticism gave to literary studies. To see this more clearly, think, for example, about the film Titanic. I think most of you have watched it. A new critic would look at single words. For example, the word unsinkable is ironic. Jack also says, make it count, which shows his attitude to life. They would notice repetition too. The heart of the ocean necklace appears many times. We see it in the past and in the present. It can stand for Rose's prison, but also her freedom. There are clear contrasts. First class rooms glow with warm golden light. The boiler rooms look cold and blue. This pattern of opposites adds meaning. The film has a frame structure. It begins and ends with old Rose. So we see the disaster through memory, not only as history. The imagery is strong. The staircase sinks underwater. Jack and Rose stand at the bow with open arms. These images suggest freedom and loss. The tone changes over time. The first half feels romantic and nostalgic. The later part feels tense and frightening as the ship sinks. The film's form also matters. It is a large scale disaster movie. It uses big scenes and slow motion. This makes human pride look small next to nature's power. Well, from a new critical angle, the point is that all these parts are working together. not just sitting there on their own. I mean, you're always asking how the pieces connect to make one whole. In Titanic, the words, the images, the structure, they keep circling the same ideas: love, class difference, fate, and human limits. The word unsinkable is ironic. The necklace keeps coming back. The rich poor contrasts show up again and again. Even the shift from romance to disaster fits this. All of that pushes toward the same meanings. That's already a kind of unity. New critics like to look at tension, two opposites living side by side, freedom and control. Rose feels trapped in her social world, but free with Jack. The ship looks strong, but it's actually fragile. A small love story happens inside a huge historical tragedy. These opposites don't break the story, they actually hold it together and make it richer. So, a new critic would say the film feels unified because the words, patterns, imagery, tone, and form all fit each other. Nothing is random. I mean, each part kind of talks to the others. And the result is a whole. So the meaning of the movie comes from how everything fits together. So we talked about close reading. We saw how new critics ask readers to look carefully at words, images, and patterns. Now we take a step further. We ask a simple question: what is special about literary language? New critics believe literary language is different from everyday language. It is also different from scientific language. Let's explain that simply. Scientific language aims to be clear and exact. It tries to avoid confusion. A scientific sentence usually has one clear meaning. The goal is information. Everyday language often aims at quick communication. We speak to be understood fast. We do not always think about style or rhythm. Literary language works differently. It is shaped to create experience. It uses sound, rhythm, and imagery. It invites attention. It slows the reader down. The key idea here is that literary language doesn't just deliver a message. It is about how the message is expressed. This is why new critics say we must pay attention to form. Form means the way language is arranged, word choice, sentence shape, sound patterns. All these matter for meaning. All these are important. All of these are important. Now look at the phrase connotation over denotation. On the slide, denotation is the basic dictionary meaning of a word. Connotation is the feeling or association a word carries. For example, the word home and the word house can point to the same, can mean the same place, can mean the same thing, but they feel different. Home suggests warmth or belonging. House sounds more neutral. Yes, more neutral, let's say. Literary texts often depend on connotation. Writers choose words for their emotional color and suggestion, not just for direct meaning. This is why two similar words are not always equal in literature. A small change in wording can change the whole tone of a line. New critics argue that this richness is what makes literature literary. Meaning grows from these layers of suggestion, layers of meaning, difference, not only from direct statements. Another point on the slide says language creates an aesthetic experience. Aesthetic simply means related to art and beauty. When we read literature, we do not only collect information, we experience mood, tension, pleasure, surprise. The language itself produces these effects. Think about rhyme in poetry or repetition or a striking image. These features shape uh, how we feel and think while reading. So, for new critics, literary language is active. It does something to the reader. It is not just a container for ideas. The key idea here is simple. In literature, how something is said is part of what is said. I mean, according to new critics, form and meaning cannot be separated. This belief, this explains why new critics resist paraphrasing. For example, if you rewrite a poem in plain words, you lose tone, sound, and suggestion. You lose part of the meaning. Now we look at a famous new critical idea that follows from this. It's called the heresy of paraphrase. The phrase sounds strong. Heresy usually means a serious mistake in belief. New critics use this word on purpose. They want to warn us. The basic claim is simple. You cannot reduce a poem to a summary without losing meaning. A paraphrase, as you know, is a restatement. A restatement in simpler words. We often paraphrase to show we understand. That is fine in daily life. But new critics say this is dangerous with literature. Why? Because meaning in literature is not only in the message, it is also in the wording, the sound, the rhythm, and the structure. If you change the words, you change the effect. And if you change the effect, you change the meaning. So when someone says this poem just means X, new critics become suspicious. They ask, what about the tone, the imagery, the word choices, the order of lines? All of these shape meaning according to the new critics. The key idea here is that form and meaning are inseparable. Form means how the text is built. Meaning grows out of that form. So this is important. A poem is not a container that holds a message. The poem is the message as a whole in its exact wording. This is why new critics say a poem is a verbal object. It is carefully made. Each word has a role. Remove or replace a word and the balance shifts. Look at the image on the slide. On one side, you see lines of a poem. On the other side, you see a short summary. The summary gives the general idea, but it loses the texture. It loses sound, mood, and suggestion. The summary may be correct, but it is thin. I mean, it's weak. The poem itself is rich. This doesn't mean paraphrase is useless in class. Teachers may still ask for it, but new critics remind us that paraphrase is only a first step. It is not the full meaning. Another way to say this is simple. Change the words and you change the poem. Think about a metaphor. If you replace it with a different statement, a plain statement, the emotional power disappears. The comparison is gone. The tone is different. So the meaning is different too. So we learned about the heresy of paraphrase. We learned that a poem cannot be reduced to a simple summary. Now we move to another central new critical idea. This idea is called organic unity. Let's explain this slowly. Organic suggests something living, like a plant or a body. Unity means wholeness or togetherness. So organic unity means that a literary work functions like a living whole. Its parts are connected. Each part has a role. Nothing is random. For new critics, a good poem is not a loose collection of lines. It's a structure where images, sounds, and ideas work together. The key idea here is connection. Every element in the text should contribute to the overall meaning. Imagery supports the theme. Tone supports the mood. Structure supports the development of ideas. If one part does not fit, unity is weaker. New critics often judge quality, I mean, the quality of a work of literature using this idea. They ask, do the parts work together as a whole? If yes, the poem is strong. If not, the poem is weaker. So unity becomes a mark of literary value. Another important point is how unity is created. New critics say unity often comes from tension and balance. A poem may hold opposite ideas. For example, joy and sadness, hope and fear, life and death. These opposites can exist together. The poem does not remove the tension, it organizes it. When these tensions are shaped into a meaningful pattern, unity appears. I mean, the poem feels complete. This is why new critics pay attention to paradox, irony, and ambiguity. These features allow different meanings to exist together, but they must still form a whole. Now, think about theme. For new critics, theme is not just a topic, it is the overall meaning that grows from the whole text. The theme is what the text does with its ideas, not just what it mentions. If all parts of the text support this larger meaning, then unity is strong. Look briefly at the image on the slide. You see puzzle pieces fitting together. This is a useful metaphor. Each piece is small, but together they form a picture. If one piece is missing, the picture feels incomplete. New critics view poems in a similar way. The key lesson here is simple. A literary work should feel like a whole, not scattered, not accidental. This does not mean every reader must agree on one meaning, but new critics strongly believed that unity could be shown through careful reading. In the previous slide, we talked about organic unity. We saw how new critics value a poem as a unified whole. Now we turn to two ideas that protect this approach. These are called the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy. The word fallacy means a mistake in reasoning. So these are mistakes new critics warn us about. Let's start with the intentional fallacy. This idea says that a text's meaning is not the same as the author's intention. In simple words, what the author meant to say doesn't fully control what the text means. Why do new critics say this? Because we often cannot know the author's true intention. Authors may leave no clear record, or they may change their minds. Sometimes authors themselves misunderstand their own work. More importantly, even if we knew the intention, the text may do more than the author planned. Words can create effects beyond intention, beyond what the author intended, I mean. So new critics argue that meaning must be found in the text itself, not in guesses about the author's mind. Now let's look at the affective fallacy. This idea says that a text's meaning is not the same as a reader's feelings. Your emotional response is real, but it does not define meaning. Why? Because feelings vary. I mean, they change from one person to the other. One reader feels sadness, another feels hope, oh, another feels nothing. If meaning depends only on feeling, then interpretation becomes unstable. New critics wanted a shared basis for discussion. They wanted something readers could point to together. The text provides that common ground. The key idea here is control. Both fallacies push interpretation back to the text, not to the author's psychology, and not to the reader's emotions. This does not mean feelings or biography are useless. They can be interesting, but for new critics, they are not the main evidence. They aren't the main evidence. The main evidence is language, word choice, imagery, structure, patterns. Another reason for these fallacies is fairness. If interpretation, I mean, what the readers understand depends on private intention or personal feeling, then discussion becomes difficult. The discussion about the text becomes difficult. But if interpretation depends on textual details, others can check the claim. So these ideas support close reading. They keep analysis focused and disciplined. Even today, many teachers still ask students to support ideas with textual proof. You remember me, for example, saying in the classroom to you when you make a comment about a text, I may say, so where did you see this in the text? Give me a line number, for example. That habit grows from this new critical thinking. Interpretation must remain text-based, I mean, based on the text, according to new criticism. We have now reached the end of our lecture, so we can maybe step back and ask a simple question. How can we still use new criticism today? New criticism is not widely used today as a full theory. Many scholars moved to other approaches. I mean, they moved to approaches that include history, culture, and politics. Methods like feminism, Marxism, and new historicism became more common. Still, close reading and textual evidence remain in classrooms. They are still used. Even if new criticism is no longer the dominant theory, its tools are still useful. Many reading practices in classrooms today come from it, especially close reading and the use of textual evidence. Let's go through the points on this slide. First, ask how the text creates meaning. This question shifts our focus. We don't only ask what a text means, we ask how language produces that meaning. We look at imagery, tone, word choice, and structure. Second, look for patterns, tensions, and contradictions. New critics believe these are important. A poem may repeat images. It may hold opposite ideas together. For example, hope and fear in the same poem. These tensions often shape the deeper meaning. Third, what theme emerges from form? Theme is not just the topic, it is the larger idea that grows from the whole text. We ask how structure, imagery, and tone support this theme. In new criticism, form and meaning work together. Fourth, is unity achieved or disrupted? We check whether the parts fit together. Do the images and ideas support each other, or do they pull in different directions? Both unity and disruption can be meaningful. The key is to show it from the text. At the same time, modern critics also add history, culture, and politics. Today, many scholars combine methods. They may start with close reading, then widen the view. So new criticism is not the final answer, but it is a strong foundation. It teaches careful attention and respect for language. And now we can close. So that was new criticism. As you can see, it's a method that asks us to slow down, look closely, and trust the words on the page. I hope this overview was helpful. I hope it gives you tools for reading literature more carefully.